So today on the red couch, I have a fascinating Caribbean woman, and I've long hoped for the opportunity to interview her. It's taken me quite a while to be able to get the opportunity to interview this lady. And I do remember very fondly being a young broadcaster and following her early life when she came to the fore regionally and internationally in 1970. 1970 was an interesting year because it also, in a sense, saw the birth of the feminist movement. And unfortunately, they made quite a scene at the 1970 Miss World show. But Jennifer Hosten from Grenada went on to, first of all, become the first woman of color to win the Miss World show. And that was quite a historic event. And also, equally historic was the fact that there were two Miss South Africas. One was the white Miss South Africa, who was Miss South Africa, and then there was Miss South Africa South, or Miss Africa South. That was quite. I mean, when I think back about that, that was quite an event. And so we had two women of color winning number one. And should anything have happened to the winner, the alternate would have been Miss Africa South, which is quite fascinating. So welcome to the Red Couch, Jennifer Hosten. Finally, I get to chat with you.
Thank you very much, Vic. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see you after so many years.
Indeed, indeed. And I briefly saw her in Grenada. I used to stay in Grenada at either the Coyaba Hotel or, when my budget would allow it, at the Spice Isle Resort, which was my favorite hotel in Grenada, whenever I was there on business for the Grenada Broadcasting Network, which was part of my responsibilities when I worked in the other place, as we now refer to it. And I saw you briefly on the beach one morning and exchange pleasantries. So very good to have this opportunity to chat with you. And in our preamble, I discovered that you actually have Barbadian family, very close Barbadian family, and I didn't know that. Yes.
Yes, I do.
And I know them very well. I know all of them very well. So I'll shout out Willie Carr and tell Willie he may want to sit and watch this particular interview. Put down the guitar for a few minutes and listen to another member of his famous family. So Jennifer Hosten, it is my pleasure to have you here on the Red Couch today. I want to take you back to 1970, but before that, because this interview is not so much about the Miss World show. Of course, it all perhaps became internationally known because of that. But I really would like to take you back and tell me what it was like. What was it like for a young woman growing up in Grenada in the time when you were a teenager and a young person? And what was your family structure like? And what was life like generally? And how has that altered since then?
Well, growing up in Grenada was quite special because one felt as if the community was a family, an extended family. Everybody took an interest in what the children did, and those were the years in the 50s and 60s. We went through hurricane. As you know, Grenada is really off the hurricane belt, but it does get the odd hurricane every 50 years or so. And so I remember in 1955 going through Hurricane Janet, which was an incredible experience. And then I remember the filming of the famous movie Island in the Sun, which was partly filmed in Grenada and also in Barbados. But many of the scenes were actually in the town of St. George's, and I remember things like that. I remember also the Bianca Sea, the sinking of that wonderful cruise liner that unfortunately caught fire outside of the harbor in Grenada. And I remember the community all coming together to go out and get the people and put them in homes and so on. I remember the fun that we had as children. You know, we didn't have all the technology that the kids have today. We didn't even have a television until I was a grown girl. But we made our own fun. We saw our friends and family in the other islands. I used to have visits with my cousins from Barbados and from family in Trinidad as well, and St. Vincent, because my close family also lived in St. Vincent, my Uncle Sidney. And so, and then of course we had friends from Dominica and all the other islands that had come to school or had visited the island, and we had made friends with them. So I think as a girl growing up, there was much more of a regional feeling and approach. It was like a family of islands and friends. Today, of course, the changes are quite pronounced. And growing up, the island was more agriculturally focused. Today, of course, it's mostly tourism, but there still is some agriculture, but not to anything to the extent that it was when we were growing up, because that was the big industry. So the focus has changed, and everything today seems to be to attract more tourists to the islands. So that's another change, and of course people are now thinking more insularly about each island. But I must say, I'm happy to see the focus of this regional feeling coming back now that we've had a few instances where, you know, it really does help to have that collective approach. I mean, you have the volcano situation in St. Vincent, and I'm really happy to see the other islands chipping in to help our neighbors and friends in St. Vincent, for instance. I think this also was felt during the intervention in Grenada in the early 80s. Some of the fallout of that was a little bit different. Then there was the hurricane that I experienced again, a second hurricane, 50 years after Janet, in 2005. And that again, I was in Grenada for that.
Wow.
I guess I saw you sometime after that on the beach, because I did own a property on Grand Anse Beach, which I've now sold.
Yes.
But so many things have happened over the years, and lots of changes. But what should we say? One would like to think that many of the changes are for the better, but we know that that some of them we think of rather nostalgically, because I think we have lost some things in spite of the fact that we may have grown in other areas.
You mentioned this sense of Caribbean, the oneness, and I have to. This has been one of my theories, is that at the level of people, we've always been generally very integrated. It has been usually at the level of leadership that at times we've been let down by the insular approach, but left alone, we the people. And I remember with fondness after the Hurricane Ivan, and seeing, I went into Grenada as president of the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, and I saw the devastation. I was there about maybe a week after it had hit. And I remember flying in. I hadn't been to Grenada for a long time, and I'm sitting on the Liat plane, and I look down, and as I'm approaching, I'm seeing all these what appeared to be swimming pools, and I said, "Wow, I didn't realize Grenada had these many swimming pools." And then as we got closer, I realized there were blue tarpaulins that were covering people's houses. The level of devastation was really immense. And we went back to Barbados, and at the station one of the stations I was managing at the time, we did a radiothon in association with my Rotary Club and District 7030. David Edwards, who had worked and lived in Grenada for Royal Bank many years before, was then the district governor. So he had all the contacts in any event. And we raised $1.2 million collected at the station for Grenada. And we turned that over then to the Rotary. I wasn't going to put it in the hands of politicians. Because I worked with Rotary, and as a Rotarian, we try to avoid the direct political interface. And some wonderful work was done in Grenada with that. And the fact that people in Barbados would give up $1.2 million, not just pledge it, but paid it in, was, I thought, a remarkable achievement. And again, in 2010, we repeated that, this time for Haiti, where I collected 1.35 million for the people of Haiti after that devastating earthquake. So I think we as Caribbean people have demonstrated that. And by the way, this is anecdotally my own views. I actually think Grenada is, I probably get crucified for saying this, I think it is the most beautiful island in the Caribbean. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. And we actually were looking to purchase a property in Grenada. We looked at a couple out in West of Hall Point and another area too as well. But in the end, I went with St. Lucia because I am a St. Lucian citizen as well. And my mother being St. Lucian, I was able to, circumvent all of the normal regulatory things. And we settled for St. Lucia, which I love very dearly. But Grenada is such a beautiful island. And the people I find Grenadian people to be genuinely some of the friendliest in the Caribbean. And they do it naturally, in my opinion, as a Caribbean person. They do it absolutely naturally. So it's a country I hold very dear to my heart, and I enjoyed my times in Grenada.
Well, I'm very happy to hear you say that. Well, I think each of the islands really have something quite special. And I spent what was it, 1998 for a year. I spent in St. Lucia on assignment to the OECS, and I really got to know St. Lucia and know St. Lucians as well. And I maintained several of the friends that I made at that time today.
Yeah. See, and that connectivity is what we have as people. We form these bonds, whether it's in my all of my friends, my really closest friends are all over the Caribbean. And because of today's technology, we are able to better connect. We don't have the restrictions of the high cost of, telecommunications and so on. So, I think left alone, we as Caribbean people will integrate a lot faster if we're given that opportunity. I want to take you now, and I wouldn't spend a lot of time on the Miss World show, but I would like to hear your take on that. What made you enter the competition? You were in the travel business at the time, I believe. You were working for an airline as an air hostess,
Yes.
and you were attracted to the Miss World show. I mean, as a woman of color, going into a competition knowing that no woman of color has ever won this competition, was that intimidating in any way?
Well, to be very honest with you, I didn't realize at the time that I was the only person of color that would have won. Quite honestly, I hadn't thought much about Miss World. It was an idea that came to me when I was working on a BWIA flight, and Miss Guyana came on the flight, and she was on her way to the Miss World contest. And they asked me to take a picture with her. I had my uniform on, and while we were talking, while she was having the picture taken, she asked me where I was from. And I said I was from Grenada. And she said, who is Grenada sending to the Miss World contest? And I said, as far as I know, they don't send anyone. And I walked off the flight, picked up a newspaper and took it with me to the hotel. And the front cover of the paper said that Grenada had decided to send a representative to the Miss World contest. But even at that point, I wasn't thinking of myself. But about 2 weeks later, I visited my parents. It was Easter holidays. I went over because I was based in Trinidad. Went over to Grenada and bumped into Gary Protein, whose mother was heading up the tourist board, and he was helping her put together the Miss Grenada contest. And he asked me if I would consider it. And I said to him, well, I didn't think that I was eligible because I was not living in Grenada at the time. And he said, of course you're eligible. And his mother subsequently followed up with me. And as a bit of a lark, and because I'm very often up for a challenge, I took advantage of that opportunity to enter the Miss Grenada contest, which I won. And the prize was to go on to the Miss World contest. But part of my motivation, well, was, the chance to represent Grenada, of course, but also, to be quite honest, to make a little money, because I thought at the time maybe there would be a money prize. As it turned out, I ended up spending all of that money getting myself ready for the Miss World contest. The wardrobe had to be, up to scratch.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm.
So that's my story. It wasn't something I had planned.
No. And take me back briefly to that night. And when you heard that announcement, you heard your name called. I mean, there were, 4 of you, if I recall, standing there for the final 2 positions. And then there were 3, I believe, and then your name was called. Now, today's Miss Universe, Miss World, they tend to drag out that announcement quite a bit, but they were like really on the ball quickly with these announcements. So you didn't have a lot of time, I suspect, to think too much. But what was that experience like when you heard your name?
You can imagine that we were all anxious, waiting to. At that point, of course, I had reached the finals, and that in itself would have been very acceptable as far as I was concerned. And then finally to hear my name announced, I was surprised and, of course, very honored. So my first reaction was surprise, and then suddenly realizing, and then subsequently realizing that I had been the first obvious woman of color to win Miss World was an honor and something that I took then on as a responsibility, because I could see that it then gave me a platform and a way of representing other women and other people of color and the Caribbean and all of that it meant. Little children who had suddenly realized that I was somewhat of an icon for them, and giving them the opportunity to do something that they had perhaps not thought that they could do. So, the truth is, I saw it as a competition, really, rather than a beauty, being the most beautiful girl in the world. I thought it was a package deal. And consequently, my preparation for Miss World may have been different from some of the others, because I thought, having been a broadcaster, I had trained with the BBC in broadcasting before I even joined BWE. I had lived in London, and so I had that kind of practical experience. And then having worked with the airlines, I was used to meeting people. So it wasn't a big deal for me. It's true that I hadn't traveled a great deal, because we had a sort of confined route that we flew through. But it was going to open doors for me, I felt, but I saw it more as a stepping stone. And I've always thought of it that way. So I used the opportunity, and I was prepared for the interview. The interview part of the competition is what I focused on. In addition, of course, to making sure that I had a really beautiful evening gown and a good costume, and and that I did all the other things that everybody else was doing. So I saw it as a comparative advantage kind of thing for me. And that's where, and I think perhaps I've often said this, especially in the last 10 years or so, that inadvertently, the women's movement may actually have spurred me on to show that I shouldn't, I never wanted to be judged by just having an attractive face. I always wanted to be judged by other things. And I worked most of my life, I think, consciously probably, or unconsciously sometimes, to further my education, because education gives you other opportunities as well. But it's interesting how it all happened. And what I find so strange is that I have done so many other things in my life. And yet the Miss World contest is the thing that keeps coming back. And, a movie was made about 1970 and the Miss World contest. And I wrote a book, and my book was an inspiration for the movie to some extent. And so I've had the book and the movie, and of course, it's taken on a life of its own. So coming back to it's just that it does keep coming back.
Coming back. What is the name of the movie and the name of your book for our viewers?
The name of the book is Miss World 1970, and it has the same cover as the poster of the movie, because the book and the movie were meant to go to complement each other. The movie's name is Misbehavior. And of course, I tell people it wasn't me misbehaving. It was the women's movement that chose that the competition to demonstrate and to throw flower bombs and to stop the performance of Bob Hope, who was on stage at the time.
Yeah. And you were crowned by Bob Hope. I remember seeing that too as well.
Yes.
I will look for it on Netflix and see if it's there and have a look at it and enjoy a little reminiscent of on that movie. I want to take you though, because you did mention the things that you've done, all of the other stuff. And I know that you did your university education. I believe you may have had, is it a double? You did two different degrees in, yeah. So tell us a little bit about your transitioning now out of that and your years as a diplomat, your years in academia. That shared with us a little bit of that, Jennifer Hosten.
Well, Vic, I want to say that one of the reasons that I felt it was important to bring out the book at the same time as the movie, and the producers of the movie felt the same thing, is that the book tells my story. The movie Misbehavior focuses on just the event when I won Miss World. So it's the story of it's that partial story, but the book goes on to talk about what I did after that, because my life didn't end when I won Miss World. But
probably was just beginning. Yeah.
I went to live in Canada, and then I went back to university. I got married shortly after. I married a Canadian and lived in Ottawa. And started a family. And it wasn't long after that I was approached by Grenada to represent them, first at the United Nations in New York. And I didn't accept that position because it would have meant moving the whole family to live in the United States and New York in particular. So I declined. And then a position came up in Canada and they approached me again. And I said yes. And so I took on the job as of Grenada's High Commissioner, which is ambassador. And just over a year of working with the Gary government was the one that appointed me. There was a revolution. And I had also been made representative to the Inter-American Commission for Women. So on top of being High Commissioner in Canada, I also represented Grenada on that UN commission. And I had been attending a meeting in Ecuador. But on my way back to Canada, I was due to stop in New York, meet with the Prime Minister's delegation, they were there for a meeting with the UN to talk about staff salaries and things like that. So it was quite a normal kind of meeting it was to be, only to discover that the meeting actually was to take place on the day that the news came across that Grenada had been taken over by coup. So then I found myself meeting with a government in exile. And this is all described in my book. And so it was quite an interesting experience, I must say. Then after meeting with the Prime Minister's delegation and going back to Canada, of course, then I had all the diplomatic fallout and the staff wondering what was going to happen. And it turned out that the Bishop government wanted to keep me on as ambassador. In fact, they ended up asking me to stay on because he heard that I was doing a good job. But I volunteered to stay for 6 months until they would replace me. But they didn't replace me. So I ended up working with them for another year and a half before giving that up when I could see the writing on the wall. But so it was an interesting time. So I worked with both governments. And of course, I could see the changes, the political changes everywhere. And the alignments that occurred. First, the alignments, with small countries, then the alignments with socialist countries, and had some rather interesting experiences. I had seen myself mostly as someone to help promote tourism and investment, of course, in Grenada. But the hard line that was being taken by the regime made it very difficult. So in a sense, it was, I thought, counterproductive, the work that I was doing, and finally I left. But I remained interested and followed the various machinations from the sidelines. And so that was interesting. So I reported on that. And then years later, I talk about going back to Grenada after that, and actually seeing the revolutionaries in prison, and so that was all sort of the finale of that experience, that revolutionary experience, which people are still considering whether what kind of effect it has really had on the culture and on the psyche of the people. But I went back to university and I completed a master's in political science and economy. And then I wrote a thesis on, it was one of the first books on the subject of the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. I got a scholarship actually from Carleton University. I won a scholarship to do this work. So they commissioned me to write this, and I was able to visit most of the countries in the Caribbean and do firsthand research. I even was able to go down to Mexico and interview people at the border, and to come away with really something that was useful at the time. So it was published by the Edwin Mellon Press in the United States. And of course, you know what happened with NAFTA. It's now been enlarged and so on. But my concern, the title of the book was The Effect on the Caribbean of the NAFTA. So I got into that. And then years later, when I worked with CEDA, the Canadian International Development Agency, CEDA, I was seconded by CEDA to CARICOM and OECS. So I lived for the year that you and I chatted about briefly in St. Lucia as the technical advisor on trade to the OECS, where I had the opportunity of being part of the trade discussions that that were looking at the effect of expanding the NAFTA to other countries would have on the Caribbean. And I came to the conclusion in that work that regional integration was so fundamentally important to the Caribbean region that it was almost counterproductive that they hadn't, the federation that was so short-lived had not gone ahead, you know?
Yeah. It's fascinating that you in your life as a diplomat, you essentially worked for two completely different countries, you know, representing Grenada under two administrations. And you must have been doing a good job that the revolutionary government would have wanted you to stay on, because one would have imagined that a lot of house cleaning would have been going on in relation to the government that had been in before, the Gary government. But then years later to be also working for the Canadian government. That's quite a remarkable achievement. I don't know too many people who could lay claim to having done diplomatic service for two separate and distinct countries. Your work with CEDA essentially, though, brought you back to the region, and then in St. Lucia gave you that opportunity to see the need for that sense of Caribbeanness. Your book, by the way, is it available on Amazon?
Yes, it is.
Oh, good.
It is.
Well, I'll be sure to get my copy, and I'm going to want to get it autographed by you at some date in the future. So I'll make sure that when I get it, I have it close at hand, or when next I'm coming to Grenada, whenever that will be.
Well,
you know?
I'll make a point of dropping through Barbados on my way to do that. Lovely.
So your career spanning broadcasting, you didn't tell me much about your broadcasting career, though. A little bit about that. I'm fascinated. I did see that in your bio. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I started off at WIBS, which was the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service, which was, as you know, a sort of tiny federation within the islands, the Windward Islands, the smaller islands. The WIBS head office had been stationed in Grenada, but all the other islands had their own stations, and we'd break off for news at different times every day. But in those days, of course, you knew what was happening in each one of the islands, because that also became part of the news that we were broadcasting. So I joined WIBS shortly after leaving school. I had such a love of broadcasting. I just wanted to get into it. I hadn't thought of too many other things at that point. Mm-hmm. And I remember going for an interview, and I think I see them now. I see Ray Smith, who was head of broadcasting. And I was actually prepared to even volunteer if they hadn't employed me. I was so keen on it. And after getting into it, they thought that I had some promise, I guess. They wanted me to get further training because they felt that I could even do the job better. So they gave me the opportunity to go to the BBC for training. And so I went off to London. And after being trained as a broadcaster, I had experience. Then I was seconded to the Caribbean Broadcasting Service at the BBC. And they did Calling the Caribbean, which is an afternoon show, came on every afternoon. Around 5 o'clock. And so I'd go out with the team. I remember Andrew Salkey and Alva Clark were there, and Jeremy Berity and people like that. Oh. And they'd do interviews. We'd first of all try to find out what stories were going on, and we'd interview the people and bring the interviews back in and edit them. So it was a real process, and it was great experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I decided once I was in London, before going back to broadcasting in Grenada, I'd take a few other opportunities. So I enrolled in a business college there and spent a year in business school. I got an extension on my time away so that I could go back and I could do shorthand and typing and all the things that I felt would make me a better broadcast journalist. And even went across to France and worked as an au pair to practice my French. I'm not sure how the French was expected to help me as a broadcaster, but I wanted to take full advantage of that opportunity before going back home. And then finally, I did go back to Grenada. So I did all of that actually before I went into this world and before I joined BWE.
Of all of the careers that you've had, and you've had quite a few, which one stands out for you? Which would you say? Is there a favorite, or was it just that at that period of your life you enjoyed exactly what you were doing at that juncture? What was that like?
Well, I say to people that in the last 10 years of my life, and I went back again to university because I've done that a few times, and I did a master's in psychology and became a counselor. So I then became a psychotherapist, and I practiced as a psychotherapist until last year. And I found that gave me an opportunity. I was interested to realize that as an older, as a more mature person, shall we say,
absolutely,
you can actually use so much of your experience, in addition to the specific areas of psychology that I worked for, which requires that training. I found it amazing to think that I could continue to contribute as an older person in a field like that. But I would have to say that broadcasting has always been a love of mine. I've always felt, quite frankly, I've been disappointed that I didn't do more in that area, in that field over the years. But it wasn't, just life just took me other places and I did other things. It's not that I wanted to do it and didn't have the chance to do it. But the other thing as well is that I think your station sounds like the answer. And I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, because it's multifaceted, and I think that it will be extremely important. The world is getting smaller. While we as small islanders, end up in other parts of the world, we take with us whatever experience we've gained. We don't always have the chance to go back and share our experiences. And not, it also is not, it's a question of what's appropriate as well, because people living in the islands don't always know or think that you have anything to contribute. But if you have the means where you can contribute through a media organization such as yours, it allows people the option of switching off. If you're not interested, you can switch it off. But the information that can be shared will be enormous. So I congratulate you on this initiative. I think it's one that's time has come for sure.
Your final thoughts. You have given me a really fascinating snapshot. I feel as if I could chat with you for the entire afternoon, and in the sense that I've only scratched the surface, and maybe we'll knock on your door again at some point in the future.
It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I think that there's so much. I'm so grateful that I have, we should say, I've been able to share my experience, for whatever good it's been to younger people. And I say that the sky is the limit for young people today, because they have so many more opportunities than we had in 1970. I'm one for believing that that feminism means that you have choice. You have the choices to take on things, to do things. You're not limited in any one kind of sphere, or limited to one or two professions, as women tended to be in the past. There's almost nothing that you can't attempt today, or that you shouldn't attempt today. And I think that's entirely positive. I think the challenges that we face now with the COVID and so on have exacerbated some of the inequities, particularly for women. And those are challenges that people are going to have to face down the road. But I think that technology, as you pointed out, is helping to bridge some of those divides. And I think that the cost of some of the technological advances will be less expensive in the future. It'll have to be, because we'll be depending much more on talking to each other on Zoom, and being part of a broadcasting station that is actually just in your living room. And so there are positives as well as a few negatives. But the key thing is to be positive when one can be, and to see how we can all pull together. And I like the questions that you have posed to me, because so many of them are things that I've wrestled with through my life. I feel that no man is an island, and in these times particularly, it is important to reach out to each other, whether it's to lend a hand or just to be there, and for people to know at the other end of a phone is someone, at the other end of your television is somebody that cares. So thank you, Vic, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you, to connect with you after all these years, and to be able to say to my fellow countrymen and my family and friends throughout the Caribbean, I'm so happy to be part of this, and I look forward to seeing you all in person when we're allowed to travel once more.
Well, the pleasure has been all mine. What a fascinating life you've led so far. And I say so far. You've been in the travel business, you've been a broadcaster, you've been a diplomat, you've been a writer, you've been a Miss World, you have been a CEDA international representative. You've done your academia work. You've achieved psychology degrees and helped people in their lives. I mean, you have had a really absolutely storybook life. I mean, it's you write all that stuff down and you say, no one person can do all of this. And yet, I suspect that you are far from done. I think you probably haven't shared with us yet, and you know what your future plans are. But someone who has led such an active and varied life as yourself, is unlikely to just want to sit back and read the book and have afternoon tea, which is always a good thing to have, by the way, you know, or morning coffee.
It's true. I look forward to more time with my children and grandchildren. That's really very much part of my life today.
Yes.
And I also say that I've reinvented myself a lot throughout my life, because I think it's important to do that. And I think that we should never be defined by any one success or any one failure. You know, I think we always have the opportunity to pick ourselves up and from whatever it is, and to do something else. So thank you for reminding me that you know, we're never too old to learn, and never too late to forge a new path.
And not to be defined by any one success or by any one failure. I think that's a great takeaway for me. You know, your experience should be an opportunity for young women. There are many young people up there, and our women have emerged in Caribbean societies. And it's a wonderful thing. As the father of 3 girls and the brother of 8 sisters, I've been always within an environment where the females have been very, very strong women in my life, starting with my late mom, who lived to 99. And so to have someone like yourself, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for young women, not just in Grenada, but across the Caribbean, to look at your achievements and say, I too can do this. You know, the world, you know, nothing is impossible. And you've proven that, you know, beyond
Well,
Vic,
I was very influenced by my mother. My mother, in her quiet way, was a person who believed that if you put your mind to something and you work hard enough towards it, you could always achieve it. Mm-hmm. And she was a broad-minded sort of person and very wise. And I think she has inspired me all of my life. So I sort of try to remember what she taught me, and I really relish the opportunity these days, working with teaching my grandchildren whatever little I can, and enjoying them. You know, so this is one thing that you know we really have to take advantage of.
Well, thank you very much. I too, my mother was my anchor, my grounding force, my inspiration. She believed in me to a fault. According to her, I didn't have faults, but I know I had many. And but she was my anchor, and in many respects, you know, still remains my anchor. But having that strong maternal instinct and that's presence, you know, Muriel Fernandes was mine, and so I see the parallel with you know, your own mom and the values, and so it is our job now to teach those that come after us and to instill in them some of the same values that were instilled in us. Jennifer Hosten, thank you so much. It has been, you have no idea how immense a pleasure this has been for me to have this conversation with you on the Red Couch.
Thank you, Vic. It's been entirely my pleasure. Thank you.
Look forward to meeting with you in the flesh sometime soon.
Same here.
Take care.